Welcome to this debate, which is part of the Western Australian Debating League's 2025 Schools Debating Competition. We acknowledge that this debate takes place on Whadjuk Noongar Boodja and pay our respects to elders past and present. Please be aware that no photography or recording is allowed during this debate. Before we begin tonight's debate, I want to extend a huge congratulations to both teams. Making it to the grand final is no easy feat, and it's a testament to the hard work, skill and dedication of the students before us. With that being said, I'd like to introduce the teams in tonight's debate. The affirmative will be taken by Perth Mod, and the negative will be taken by Sheet. The topics for tonight's debate contains an info slide that since the late 1900s, Western countries have moved away from institution-based care, for example, orphanages, psychiatric care, to individualised care, such as foster care and in-home care, due to pressure from human rights advocates. This was done by drastically reducing admission rates and cutting government funding to facilities. And the topic is this House prefers a world where human rights advocacy was focused on reforming institutions rather than deinstitutionalisation. Debate will speak for 7 minutes with a single warning bell at 1 and 6 minutes and a final double bell at 7 minutes. Between the first and 6 minutes, members of the opposing team may stand to offer points of information which the speaker may either accept or decline. Speakers are welcome to use their own devices to time their speeches, noting that devices with internet capabilities must be on both silent and airplane mode. At the end of the debate, the adjudicator will provide a general adjudication and will then be available to discuss the debate with individual speakers. Parents and teachers are asked to refrain from approaching the adjudicator until the speaker's questions have been answered. We have a wonderful panel adjudicating tonight's debate with panelists Kelly, Mason, Bridget, Levi, Meg and Eleanor, and the chair, Fraser. So now that the panel has been introduced, please make welcome the first speaker of the affirmative team to open their testimony.
Speaker, this debate is about protecting and prioritizing our most vulnerable people, a principle that only exists under our side of the House. Now, for some setup. For the framing and definition, we define institutions as any form of or custodial service delivering ongoing care or supervision with A, a dedicated facility, B, professional staff, C, admission and discharge rules, and D, internal governance and external licensing. Sectors include disability support, elder care, addiction treatment, youth residence, schools, etc. Now, we define deinstitutionalization as policy that actually reduces or eliminates institutional placements by closing bed facilities, tightening admission, and diverting funds to non-institutional and community/family/ market-based care. We define human rights advocacy as non-state action, such as litigation, legislature, lobbying, budget campaigns, inspections, monitoring, etc., aimed at changing rules, resources, and oversight to realize rights. Now, the status quo problems. Since the 20th century, advocacy focused on closing institutions rather than actually fixing them. The problem is that the care is worsened with deinstitutionalization because disabled, elderly, or mentally ill individuals often cope in unsupported communities. People face instability. People are left untreated, and all that will actually prove to you in our case. For the first speaker, we on our side have better care for vulnerable people in both through a found community where what our vote actually looks like is first, what does our reframing actually look like? Now, number one, we have smaller and human scale facilities with a cap size of 30 to 40 residents maximum. 2, staffing plus ratios, 1 caregiver per 4 children. like trained staff in first aid, trauma-informed care, and health intervention. Now 3, independent oversight plus complaint systems with regular surprise inspections by independent human rights bodies. Now, what does the comparative look like? There's closure facilities, and there's default to community-based care, i.e. foster homes, in-home care, fragmented dispersed services, and care is delivered through small non-government organizations, foster homes, and governments actually save money by closing expensive facilities. Why is this the likely comparative? Because deinstitutionalization refers to the closing of facilities in and of itself, which will look down shutting down organizations. And community care is the next best alternative, i.e. foster care is likely to occur in the comparative. And care cannot be given on a wide scale or institutional-based level, and thus will be diversified to charities and non-government organizations. Now, for my first point, why are we actually guaranteeing more effective care for the most vulnerable? Deinstitutionalization worsens care for the most vulnerable who are at the heart of our matter, because it removes stable and professional options without actually replacing them. Reforming institutions ensures people actually receive rights protective services. In the status quo, advocacy focuses on shutting down institutions, and governments close beds to save money, and push people into community alternatives that are underfunded, fragmented, and overstretched. Speaker, these vulnerable groups are children without their guardians. They're people with severe disabilities. They're psychiatric patients, and these are the people that suffer the most, we tell you. Now, we have 4 mechanisms for this tonight. First, the capacity gap leads to decrease of resources. Closing institutions reduces the total number of places. Community services rarely actually scale up at the same speed, and wait lists explode. This means many vulnerable people are denied any sort of placement at all, leaving them untreated, homeless, or abandoned. Now, for example, a child with no family may wait months for foster placement, but a reformed children's home would have admitted her immediately. 2, instability leads to fragmented care. Foster community placements are temporary and fragile, and foster parents are withdrawn, families are broken down, and non-government organizations lose funding. Vulnerable people are repeatedly moved from home, severing relationships with carers, doctors, teachers. In contrast, institutions once reformed provide consistent environments where staff turnover is managed and records are kept. Now, 3, a loss of skill density leads to poor quality interventions. Institutions have trained professionals such as nurses, social workers, therapists, and special educators. And deinstitutionalization actually disperses vulnerable people into homes without specialized staffs, meaning there are complex cases such as autism, schizophrenia, cerebral palsy, etc., are all made with untrained professionals, which simply can't happen at the same level in these community cares. Lastly, there's an invisible causes leads to no corrective pathway, especially if there's abuse. In a facility where abuse can be detected, such as inspections can happen, complaints can happen, and there's multiple staff observing each other. Vulnerable people can actually be dependent on the very person mistreating them in these smaller community care, foster care situations. And lastly, just impacting vulnerable children actually cycle through instability, trauma, poor education, lifelong disadvantage. Disabled and mentally ill individuals relapse, suffer abuse, or end up homeless. The elderly people endure hidden neglect, accelerating illness and death. And on scale, this affects all vulnerable populations across disability, child welfare, and mental health. And the duration for developmental harm on untreated illness, irreversible, and the opposition is simply just inhumane. I'll take a point. No point, okay. Now, for my second point, protecting dignity and social belonging. We believe reforming institutions protect dignity and belonging by creating structured, supportive communities. Now, the opposition assumes that these communities actually equals integration. In reality, vulnerable people placed in families or small homes are often socially excluded, hidden away, or treated as burdens. Now, these institutions, once reformed, can be designed as places where people live together. Yes?
Can you actually recognize why they're being excluded?
Oh, they're simply being excluded because, once again, there's a much greater power here, for the rural caregivers who might not have as much of a connection to them, and there's a much smaller community as a whole, where it would be less likely for these people to actually have other people to reach out to. Now, I have not 1, not 2, but 3 mechanisms to prove you why a case wins. Firstly, they actually create a community of peers. Institutions bring together people with similar needs: children, disabled, youth, elderly. Shared activities such as education, therapy groups build belonging and actually reduce isolation. In foster or private care, vulnerable people are often the odd ones out and seen as different or burdensome. Secondly, institutions provide structural opportunities for integration. Reformed institutions can actually partner with local schools, workplaces, and community groups, and residents actually have pathways to reintegration. In dispersed foster settings, coordination is weak, so vulnerable people often stay home and disengage from society. Now, third, institutions allow for visibility, which reduces stigma. Institutions, when open, are transparent and make vulnerable people people a visible part of society. Now, deinstitutionalization hides them from behind closed door, out of sight, out of mind. Now, for our impact, first, children. A teenager with disabilities in the foster care system may spend their entire life isolated, never meeting peers that are like-minded. Whereas, in a reformed residential school, they may make friends, get adapted education, and have wider community programs. For the elderly, an old man cared for alone at home may feel useless and isolated and abandoned. Whereas in a reformed elderly home, when he has peers, activities, dignity, he has a better quality of life and more peers. The end. And we are proud to have
We thank the first affirmative speaker for that fine speech and welcome the first negative speaker to begin their team's case. Three points today's speaker, 1 point of rebuttal and 2 points of substantive. I'm going to start with who we think gets better care. We think we went on our side of the house. The opposition's claimed that they get better trauma-informed care on that side of the house. We think this is largely unsubstantiated. We also think it's untrue because we don't think that the qualifications they claim that the staff are having actually ensures quality care. And why do we think this? We think that it enables someone who otherwise would have no connection to the child to connect with them, or at least have an attempt to connect with them. But ultimately, we think on our side of the house, having people who know the child, or at least are able to spend a greater period of time with that child over many years, is ultimately going to give better, more trauma-informed care in the long run. So we think that that point is a negative point on that, and we think we win on that point. They said that they get more children into care, thus ensuring they better care. Let's put it in perspective, right? Let's say my 3-year-old nephew went into foster care for the first time. Let's say his parents died, or maybe they can't take care of him anymore. We think this is a problem. Just because he's going into care, now he's being exposed to the trauma of the group home on the side of the house. No, thank you. We think that what this looks like is my 3-year-old cousin going in and then being surrounded by 9, 10, 11, 12 other kids who have come from very broken, very problematic environments. Maybe exposure to drugs, maybe exposure to violence. And my 3-year-old cousin would now be exposed to these same things and would carry that trauma with him, which otherwise, on our side of the house, have better accessibility with individual foster care systems he would not have otherwise experienced. The other third point which they lose on is that kids move around a lot and they say that on their side of the house they get consistency because they have the same room. We think that this is a poor point because it's not consistent with the people and the staff. That is inherent to their side of the house. In these group foster homes, we have staff who are moving around constantly because they are staff, not parents, who are trying to look after this child. And so we think we get on our side of the house at least a few more long-term foster carers. Why? Because it is possible, and it is possible in the nature of the thing. And so because of that, we win on that point because we get more exposure. Yeah, I'll take a quick point.
If a young child is facing forms of abuse behind closed doors in the community care, like foster care, are the decisions to speak out to a higher or lower standard than if they were in a heavily regulated, larger institution with many actors of accountability?
So what we think about the institutions is that there's an incentive to push things under the cover there. So yes, maybe that there is a greater risk of things being exposed to trauma on that side of the house. But what we think we win on is that on our side of the house, it's very clear that who is to blame for the trauma. Whereas in the group setting, there's multiple staff who are rotating through. It's not always clear who's causing the issues, and it might take more time for them to be exposed to that. We think we get better accountability on our side of the house as a result of that. So let's get into some quick setup. What a group care looks like. It's people from similar situations coming together under an umbrella service like foster care, aged care, which I think the opposition is largely not engaged with. We think what change looks like is just more investment in it. And we think that individual care is kind of in the model of like tutor versus teacher. When you have a tutor, you have more time on relevant issues, whereas when you have a teacher, it's more lecture-based, it's more generalised. And we think on our side of the house, it necessitates having better specialised care because it is inherent on our side of the house, and we think it allows those children to get, or allows those old people to get better quality care. We still think that it is it applies even if no one is qualified because, again, as we mentioned earlier, they are more likely to know the person, and we think that is ultimately better. So what is the problem? There's a lack of personalised care for individual needs. Institutions create generic care that serves few or that people are getting care. We think on our side of the house, where we don't have institutionalised care preferences, we get more engagement with care services, we get better personalised care, we get better accessibility for all cultural groups, and on their side of the house, there's less people engaging with the care, and there's greater risk of negligence, and also a continuous cycle for those going through troubled backgrounds.
So let's get into the points of substandard. Number one, institutional care is inherently problematic for the people it seeks to help. Who are these people? These are people from complicated backgrounds. Foster care or orphanages is one mechanism. These are kids from violent, drunk and broken homes. We think it still applies to Judy as well, back to Hill in institution. We think there's a second mechanism is aged care. People with physical, age-related disabilities, they're suffering from conditions like depression and loneliness. I think a third group of people this extends to is like people in hospitals and in psych wards. Raw Perth is a chaotic or simulating place, and the people coming in here have complicated physical and psychological conditions. What does our win path here speak? We need to prove that these institutions are actively harmful to the people in these complicated situations. Two, we need to prove that we get better outcomes for these people when their care is individualised. And three, we need to prove to you that reform cannot improve these institutions to a point that they are better than individualised care. So, let's continue. Why is it bad? We think that these places are one, commercial and sterile. This is frightening, and it's even more funny. They can't be homely because they're not a home. They're an organisation, they're an entity. And so we think this is bad for people who are maybe suffering from Alzheimer's. You want to have them in a home because in a home they feel familiar, they feel comfortable. We think for kids it's better for them to be in a home because that is where you want to be raised, not in a big building with lots of other people. Two, why are they bad? Because what these all have in common is a lack of permanency. They all have rotating staff, rotating people in rooms around you. This lack of consistency is confronting, especially for people who are coming into these places who are already traumatised. No, thank you. We think with consistency it creates stability for these people, which improves their outcomes. This applies to older people with Alzheimer's. We think even with increased investment and attraction for workers, the corporate nature of these businesses necessitates that these places will always have rotating staff, and that is something they have to cop on their side of the house to lose on. But we win on speaker. Three, we think that grouping traumatised people together, or people with needs together, is just generally bad. Let's look a bit in group homes. We think bullying in group homes is a massive issue. We think that there's greater exposure to violence in juvie. We think that these people would benefit from being in individual care because they are able, no thank you, to deal with their problems individually, get the dedicated help they need without them taking on more trauma from other people. And that's inherent to their side of the house. That cannot change even when you invest more in it, even when you advocate for it to be better. And even if they did, even if they could somehow improve it, it's likely very expensive. And even if it is implemented, it's going to be, no thank you, poorly implemented. It's not likely to be done well. So then, why is individual good? We think the same for the tutor-teacher method. You have an improved ability to develop relationships. Foster parents generally for years. Family carers with the NDIS funding. They have hours. They get to know them. It's more familiar, and so we think that's inherently good. And two, we think it's inherently specialised. So why it's never going to get better? Because we think that these mechanisms are exclusive and inherent to each of them, and so thus we win this point because we see that it's more likely someone is going to get quality care on our side of the house, and we think that in a world where we see that there is more investment, that we still prefer people in individual care over institutionalised care. Second point of substance for today's speaker, how will you get better engagement with services? So let's go into it, right? We think there's a lot of stigma that surrounds these places. We think that people are unlikely to want to go into these carers, into aged care, because there is so much stigma that surrounds them. There's so much horrifying stories around them, and so people are likely to not get the help that they actually need. We think that when we get individual care, we think that people are more likely to engage with these services and get the treatment they need, or just have increased reliance. We think that saying, oh, you're going to have someone clean your house for you is much more acceptable than saying, oh, you're going to be put into a home which is serviced and it cleans for you. We think generally we get better engagement with these services, more people are more likely to be inclined to engage with them. That is better because they get more care that they need. And so for those two reasons, plus the point we went on it earlier, we win this debate. Thanks.
Thanks to the first negative for that great speech. We welcome the second affirmative to continue their science class.
The opposition comes out in extremely bad faith and takes us at our worst while idealizing their world, and in doing so, we cannot have a debate because we can idealize our world and we get nowhere. So let's ground this debate into something more realistic. And what I mean by that is that not every child that's vulnerable, not everyone in these situations has a foster care that's willing to take them in, that's willing to provide every service they need, and willing to do all of these amazing services that they claim to have. And not every institution is there to promote bullying, to promote violence, that kind of thing. These institutions are held accountable by governments, by services, by the news, and they work in the interest principally for these vulnerable people. So putting that aside, let's go into some main themes of debate before I move into my practical point about how, as human rights advocates, it's more beneficial as a group that advocate for these vulnerable people to promote these reforming institutions rather than complete the institutionalization for these vulnerable people who we have at heart. So these institutions have a range of services. They are provided by the government. They are in the limelight. We know about Banksia Grove. We know about Banksia Hill. Sorry. We know about all of these places because they're in the limelight. There's accountability. There's media. No one can go into a foster home and be like, that child's being abused, because we don't have that level of accessibility there, and no one can keep them accountable. And so as human rights advocates, why do we promote a world where we don't know what's happening? We're putting these people behind closed doors and leaving them out to dry. No, thank you. And they failed, which moves me into this idea that these foster carers, taking them at their best, have this care and this kind of thing. And they bring up this point about aged care and Alzheimer's. Well, I'd like to say, a lot of these aged care people have families. They have the people close to them, and if these families don't really, can't really care for them, well, who's to say that these foster care family is, one, going to go out and be like, I want to care for these old people, and two, care for them, because they are, let's face it, they are a burden, and that's why the family has to put them in aged care, because they have to go to work, they have to provide, and they can't really care for these old people. So what do we promote? A reformed institution where they do have services, where these places are accessible. They do have monitors. They do have things that accounts for them losing their way when they go on a ward. Forgetting to do basic necessities in their life. These places are built for that, and that's what we're advocating for. No, thank you. Rather than the assumption that all of a sudden, all the 100 orphans in one orphanage does not get 100 foster care families. That's the reality, and that's what the opposition fails to acknowledge in this debate. And by debating in bad faith. I will now take a point.
So who is like the individual that is going to be held accountable for any of the actions done in an institution where there is not one-on-one accountability?
There is no need for an individual to be held accountable. What matters is the actual accountability. And under their side of the house, we actually don't have the accountability. We don't know what's happening in foster care. We can't know because of things like privacy. We don't know if these children are getting abused. We don't know how they're getting treated. We don't know how they're getting fed. But under the limelight, under institutions that are provided by the government, that are audited, that do provide reports, that are in media limelight, that are accountable by these human rights advocates that go in and be like, oh, how are you being treated? Are they being fed? What are the stories coming out of this place? What kind of things? That's accountability. Assuming that that all of a sudden when they're in foster care, we now know exactly what's going on behind closed doors and we can hold them accountable, and now they can find another foster care family that's somehow perfect, is really idealized and fails to engage with the actual heart of the matter here. Which moves me into my practical point about how human rights advocates, as the topic states, should focus on reforming institutions as it aligns more with their mission of achieving care for these vulnerable people that need it in this society. So, and as I've said, deinstitutionalization, advocating for that leaves them with vague, untrackable goals. All of a sudden, advocating for this kind of thing, it leaves them at the foster care step. Once they've gone into that home, once they've gone into, it's private, they don't know what's going on, and that leaves the public, no thank you, it leaves the public undercovers, they don't know what's actually going on. And so as the public, how do they engage with that? How do they look at that and go, that's actually beneficial? And so is there a point in human rights advocates to promote that when they can't actually back up that that's beneficial for these vulnerable people? And no thank you. So my main mechanisms, firstly, the clear targets for monitoring and advocacy. As I've brought up tonight in rebuttal, they are visible, these institutions, and under this reform, they are more accessible. As we promote for a reformed institution where these places are, no thank you, are inspected, they are audited, the government has inspections, that kind of thing. They are working well. For the majority, they are working well in the current status quo. And under these reforms, they'll work even better with more targeted care, with better services, and that kind of thing. So for human rights advocates, they now have clear targets for monitoring. They can then look at reports. They can go, okay, this place is doing well. Let's push for more reforms so more children can go in and receive better care. And that the public can then see actual substance. They see actual change. They're going, okay, no thank you, these institutions are actually beneficial for us, so let's go on with this claim. And as human rights advocates, that provides a positive feedback loop where they're gaining more support. And that's because they receive more credibility, which is my second mechanism.
What information?
But, no, thank you. By gaining legitimacy, there's actual things going on that the public can actually see the improvements that these vulnerable people have by going to reformed institutions rather than leaving them to dry in foster care.
What
So we
information
have
last
no
chance?
guarantees actually good for them. No, thank you. And what does that actually mean? It means building coalitions. Now all of a sudden human rights advocates have the support of workers in these institutions, that have the support of public services, that work in the interest of the government and that kind of thing, that have the support of the general public, that want to see these vulnerable people having care. And the human rights advocates now fundamentally have a much stronger base to stand on and go, we want more carers for these vulnerable people. We want to improve that ratio from 1 to 100 to 1 to 40, to 1 to 10, to 1 to 5. And that change can actually occur because there is improvements being recorded, rather than just assuming that all of a sudden every house in Australia is up for foster care and will treat them perfectly. And that's a system that is visible, it's in the public, and that is so important for these advocacy groups because they actually have something to, one, hold accountable, and two, support in the public and get it into the media limelight. So what does this actually look like, the impact? They're pushing for real change. Caring for 100 orphanages in a reformed institution is much easier than 100 perfect foster cares. And that's what we're advocating for as human rights advocates. Thank you.
Thanks to the second affirmative speaker for that great speech, and now we're on the second negative speaker.
This debate, which one was speaking to tonight? I don't think it is. None of them are on? Okay, we're all. My bad. This debate, I've identified two main themes, right? It's whose side of the house receives the better care, and the second theme being which system has more accountability. And in that second theme, I will integrate my own point. Firstly, I'll talk about what their first speaker has spoken about, right? They've talked about this removal of these professional options and how there's going to be this lack of professionals, right? But when this deinstitutionalization was happening, these professionals don't disappear into thin air. They go work into the one-on-one, and they go work into the systems of the foster care, or they go work into the in-home care, where they can actually use their specializations to better help individuals who need their care to be tailored to these specializations, right? They don't just disappear as they've tried to argue. They've talked about these long waits, right? And if this was such a massive issue currently that is going to be fixed by their side of the house, like we would already see the push in the status quo from these activists to massively increase the funding, and we are fine with having a long wait if that's what it creates to make change. No, thank you. And we also have found that the institutions still do exist to some extent. There has been a massive deinstitutionalization, but institutions do exist for this exact reason, because we acknowledge that they are of worse care, but they may be better than nothing. So there are some institutions still that is where these children go who have to, while they are waiting in these long waits for their better care. They've talked about kind of this community of peers, right, and how it will help them. And as our first speaker has addressed, it's just not a positive community, right? They have said that you're exposed to children who are, say, if you're going into an orphanage, who have come from these broken homes and violent homes. Say you're going into a psychiatric care because you have depression or anxiety, but now you're surrounded by people who have other mental illnesses that are violent and are much more extreme than yours. No, thank you. And you're having to be exposed to them at all times. They've talked about how they can partner with schools. Firstly, I want to say a main issue with their way they've gone about this. They've tried to establish some sort of a model, but they do not have the ability to do this. They have to provide for each and every reform. They said there were going to be 40 to 50 people, which they have just stated. For each and every reform that they say is going to happen, they have to provide a reason to why this is very likely to happen, right? And they're going to say that they're going to partner with schools, which we already see with the same issue as this community can be a not positive community. We see in schools, we see classes for the people who have learning disabilities, and essentially getting put into these classes to just not be dealt with. And often it's just the schools, as I will talk about later, and a lot of the institutions can have motives to not actually provide the best care because they do not have this accountability. And we have told you at first they are inherently problematic and they have exposure to these violent communities, which they have tried to rebut by just saying that we are not taking them in the best, by just saying that that these institutions are promoting bullying. No, they are not promoting bullying. It's just the issue that there are always going to be people who are from these bad backgrounds and have been influenced by them. They are always going to be on both sides of the house. They're always going to exist. However, on our side of the house, let's look at an orphanage. Instead of being an orphanage exposed to 40 other people, they're just going to be at a foster home with only the parents. They're not going to be able to enact or expose the other children in foster care to this violence, right? And they talked about these like aged care foster homes, which like, why would they even want to do this? There's no one who wants to do it, right? But again, that's just not what happens. As we've seen from the info slide, it hasn't been a disappearance of anything, it's just been a move. It's been a move from institutionalized care to de-institutionalized care. It is not about the disappearance of all the workers or disappearance of people wanting to do it. It is just a move from where and how the workers distribute their sure.
If you characterize society as like a gated, almost student-teacher and like private stuff, how will we be able to integrate these vulnerable groups into society as well as like a larger community-based and like personal focused like institution where they actually focus on community at the heart?
Institutions are so much more isolated from society. You are stuck in an institution. In a foster home, you will be going outside. You will be going to the community. When you are in an institution, often they are built to have the entire community there, which we have told you why it is problematic. That is the whole point of building a problematic institution. But when you're in a foster home, you will have to go to the shopping centre to get food. You will be eating out. You will be going to schools, right? You will be engaging with the community as everyone does in a regular home, right? I engage with the community. And they've tried to say that their second speaker tried to say that there will be some support from the workers, right? But let's just look at the two kind of types of workers we have. We have workers who really care about the children. And they do not want to be under the stress of the massive public eye, right? They're not going to have the support of these activists to keep introducing more and more reforms, which won't actually change how they do anything, given they are good workers. They're just going to have more stress in their work. However, we look at the other side of the bad workers who are negligent workers. They just do not want this at all. There are going to be no groups of workers who really want all of these things for themselves, because for their own environment, for their own lifestyles, it will always negatively impact them, right? No, thank you, which is why we really win on this thing. And I'm going to talk about the second thing is which system has more accountability, right? They've started opening with, we know about Banksia Grove, right? First of all, that's just an example. And can you tell me who in that institution was punished? Can you tell me who in that institution actually received the responsibility for all of the actions that happened on? And they said that they've actually admitted that no individual is held accountable as long as the institutions are held accountable. No, thank you. But what help does that do if the institution can just start up again? If it is held accountable, if it gets bad PR, but the people who work at those institutions can simply rebrand and make a new institution and keep doing the same thing. And their mechanisms for all of the ways that they're held accountable is inspections, audits, reports, and news, which happens on both sides of the house. We see inspections and reform happening in foster care. That is just something that always happens. Except institutions have the money to put in a fake image when these things come, to treat these people well. However, it is a lot harder to hide abuse at a home because they don't have the money, they do not have the expertise to kind of hide this fake image. And it's even a problem how, with say an orphanage, these children do need privacy. We have seen examples of people using the monitors that they so try to say hold them accountable, which again is only viewed by the people in the institution, so it is not outside people who are going through that at all times. It is the people within the institution. Have they been used to just watch the kids and for their own, negative ways to do so, and they do not have anyone to stop them from doing so. They are just in front of the monitors by themselves with no accountability. Moving on to the point is how we see more accountable care. So let's look at the two types of people who worked in these institutions when they were shutting down. We have the people who cared and they would go to these deinstitutionalized people. The people who don't care, the negligent, they would stay there. They would continue doing their negligence. So when we reform this, we see that these people are promoted and we see these people who are the longest serving will continue to be there, which is why there will be no accountability, and this is why we win the debate. Thank you.
Thank you for the second negative for that great speech. We now welcome the third further to conclude their sentence case.
during this debate, we've identified two main themes of contention. One being the most important, being which side of the house gets better care, and within that we see the idea of care itself, talking about individualized care versus the expertise that you get within institutions. And second being this idea of in which place do you get more community. And the second being where accountability is most prevalent. So let's start with this idea of better care. First negative comes out swinging by telling us that individualized care is better suited for the people who are vulnerable and people who will get it in deinstitutionalized versions of help. I have two responses to this. One, being that in and of itself it is not scalable because as we told you at second affirmative and down the bench, that it's unrealistic to assume that this kind of individualized care and caring care from families like foster parents or other in-home carers, it is unrealistic to assume this will happen for all vulnerable people, but even if it did happen, which is a big reach because we do want to take you at your best, the responses to this are one, it's talking mostly about foster care because even in the example given to us on the topic sheet, here there are examples of in-home carers for people who have used psychiatric care. And they told us that individualized care is better because you have that sort of connection, but we tell you that there is no connection between an in-home carer and their patient. The only idea in which there would be a connection would be with a family and a foster child, and thus they only really look at this one example. But second is that the most important thing is that quality is inconsistent because expertise ultimately outweighs connection. And I have mechanisms for why this is true. And this is simply because for example, in the status quo already, we trust therapists to go to our problems on two mechanisms. One, they go to university specifically to help you with what they need. Maybe they don't know you, maybe you're not individualized, maybe you don't have the connection. But in the end, society still values them and thinks that they are good people to go to. Maybe precisely because they don't know you, because you'll feel weird talking about it to people you know, to an estranged uncle you haven't seen in years. Maybe you will feel better talking things out with someone who doesn't know you. And thus we see that individualized care isn't always the best option. Because in the status quo, we find expertise to be more beneficial. And even just in and of itself, when we see people who do have trauma-informed care, mental health expertise, sexual violence, information, no thank you, and things like that, we see that the vulnerable people get the most help rather than just being able to rapport with someone that they know. And we tell you that even if that was beneficial to them in kind of like a social sense, we think it's more important to address the root causes of their vulnerability in the start. And address that, thank you, what they're going through. And we think that it's best achieved when you have expert care. And the kind of response we hear to this is that these expert carers will go to the institutionalized care if reforms are not taken. But we tell you that, one, under the reforms that will happen, that we have told you at first, on our side of the house, we do want to decrease the ratios, which means we will need more staff in institutions, and thus more people are likely to join institutions and be more experienced anyways. But the idea that suddenly when all these institutions go, they're randomly going to go to random houses, no thank you, and then connect with these people undermines their entire point at the start anyway, because then these aren't people who know you, these aren't people who have a connection, these are people who came because out of necessity, because their job got shut down. So either they're contradicting their point or they have mischaracterized their own debate. Within this idea, they also tell us this idea at second that they have a better engagement with service. Now, this point was about stigma, and I can tell you, I'll take in a second, why this point was completely irrelevant, and it's because it mischaracterized the people who seek institutions in the first place. For example, if my parents both died in a fire, I'm not going to tell someone to not take me to an orphanage because there's stigma, because I literally do not have a choice. I need care, I need food, I need shelter, I need water, I need a bed. I'm not going somewhere out of the stigma that I won't be able to. Same with people in age, like we don't think that is valuable enough in this debate to stand anywhere, but more importantly, we just don't think it's true. Like, there's no stigma that people hate orphanages. We view them as an institution that is caring and compassionate and looking out for the most vulnerable in society. Same with aged care. We find those people very noble and brave and community-centered, and thus this idea of stigma probably exists more on their side, because what we do hear from people who do have foster kids is that these kids are reckless and that they're loud and they have no incentive to bring them in. So if they wanted to argue stigma, I tell you that it exists probably more on their side. I will take the point.
Okay, so I think you're making a trade-off here, right? So obviously you have a relationship with a psychologist, right? That's fantastic, that outweighs the friend. However, let's say you have 16 psychs over 16 different weeks. They're all different. You have to tell your story again to do that. I personally think, and I think our team thinks, that it's better to have a long-term friend who you trust than someone you see differently each time. What do you think?
Okay, well, two responses to this. First, the idea that you will have a long-term friend in these deinstitutionalized versions is simply not true. Imagine you do go stay with an estranged uncle or even someone that you know closely, a family member, after your parents die. We tell you that if they don't have kids your age, you're not making a friend anyways, you're just getting people who look after you. We tell you that if you are in the aged care sector, you're just getting an in-home carer, you're not getting a friend who looks after you. If you're in disability support services, you're not getting a friend, you're just getting a carer. So in all these examples, you can't provide to us or mechanize why you're actually getting a friend rather than just someone who is paid to look after you. But more importantly, we tell you that the entire time of this debate, the negative team has been associating institutions with how they would look pre-reforming. They're telling us that you'll see 16 sites in 6 weeks. Well, not under the reforms we've told you. And if Second really wants us to explain why these reforms are most likely, we've told you the reforms will look like capacity maximization, so let's say it's 40 people per house, staffing ratios improved, more expertise care, and more accountability. And we've told you that these are the reforms because we've identified these are the 3 most big problems with institutions in the first place: the lack of accountability, the insane amount of people that are burdened there, and the lack of expertise. And thus, obviously, it makes sense to reform the big 3 problem areas, and that is why they are most likely. But thus, you cannot claim that with decreased staffing ratios, with increased expertise, you will be seeing 16 sites in 6 weeks. And we find it more valuable that at least you're getting some sort of expert help than, as you said, friends who are like in the same situation as you and will bring you down and whatnot. To go back into the community sector a bit, to kind of with our material that we gave you at Second, they give us this idea that their 3-year-old cousin will be living with people who do drugs and stuff like that. We think this is a fundamental mischaracterization, honestly kind of insulting to vulnerable people in our community, because we tell you that not all orphans are drug addicts, and not all aged care workers are going to bully people and doing things like that, and the institutions in and of itself have staff to kind of oversee this. But you know what doesn't have staff to oversee it? Foster caring homes in regional areas, or things where these kind of oversight lacks. We tell you it's more likely they'll be doing drugs there with no one to check on them than doing drugs out in the open with your social worker, the room next door. And thus we win on this point of better care, because they cannot prove to us they get better community, and they cannot prove to us that individualized care is better. And then just to sum up the smaller point of accountability, we've told you time and time again, accountability will exist on larger scales. They tell us that Banksy Hill individualized, like an individual person wasn't held accountable, but it doesn't matter. We tell you it's more important that an institution itself is held accountable so that big change can happen. They keep pushing this point. We just don't think it is as important as the lack of accountability that will occur on their side of the house, simply because if there's matters of privacy, there is a matter of accessibility, and there is no news outlet going to every foster care home or every aged care home that will in fact want to pick up the story. And thus in and of itself, accountability is achieved better on our side. So we win this second theme, and thus we win this debate. Thank you.
Thanks to the affirmative for that great speech, and we now welcome the third negative to conclude their sides, Harry Sanders.
Speaker, the absolute audacity of this team to continually, let me start that again. Speaker, the absolute audacity of this team to continually allege that we keep on taking them at their worst, when in fact they have been taking us at our worst continuously. What do I mean by this? What I mean by this is they continuously mischaracterize what foster care realistically looks like in the best case scenario, or even in the realistic case scenario here. Because what foster care looked like wasn't just you ship these kids off to random families with absolutely zero audits whatsoever and zero accountability measures. No, we think this was an absolutely problematic characterization and was in fact what was happening in these institutions. We thought what realistically was the status quo when we had foster care and social workers, when we actually had people coming over every week to actually check that everything was accountable. Further, we think that there was actually better accountability measures for the institutionalized places. Why? We think that places like orphanages had their own specific communities.
More information.
No, thank you. Their own specific communities and their own specific schools and whatnot. We think that realistically, better accountability also came from the fact that, kids in foster care had to go to school. Teachers and all of their peers were still going to see them, and if they were all of a sudden now malnourished, we think that realistically that was an accountability measure that was unique to our side of the house. Okay, 2 main things in this debate. Accountability and who gets better care, where accountability also kind of fits under that, but accountability is a big measure in this debate. Alright, two main contentions underneath this accountability. Visibility and how accountability is achieved. Okay, I've already gone over this visibility argument in my introduction. Yeah, go on.
At the entry and more accessible level, which side sounds like they're getting more professional outcome and training? A household with no guarantee and trained care, or communities with services that like to care for the vulnerable people and trained professionals with publicly proven programs?
Where do you think these people are going to go? Where do you think these people with expert knowledge are going to go now that we've been institutionalized places? they're not just all of a sudden going to disappear because we no longer have institutions. What they're more likely going to happen is now go and work with the institutionalized areas. We don't think really the kinds of people who are working and the kinds of people who are actually working in these aged care homes or these orphanages, they were still going to have the same incentives to still help out people. They weren't all of a sudden going to drop those incentives and then absolutely disappear off the face of the planet. We think that realistically, that incentive still existed for them to help out. We think that they still existed in our side of the house. They were just going to operate in a different way. We think that realistically what this was going to look like is you have a foster care kid, no thank you, a foster care kid going to see a psych every other week. We think that that was the realistic case scenario here. We didn't think all of a sudden people were going to drop off the face of the planet because the actual incentives for these people to help people still existed on our side of the house, and this was not mutually exclusive to their side of the house. Note that a lot of the material about expert care, which is a lot of what their case hinges upon, no thank you, falls out of this debate. Because all of a sudden they actually did not do any analysis on why people actually were helping in the first place. We tell you that people were still going to help out in any capacity that they could because that was the kinds of people that they were. So that was that's how we win our side of the house. On that thing. No thank you. Alright, let's talk about visibility. So the opposition wanted to argue that you had absolutely no visibility in deinstitutionalized care. We tell you that A, this was not mechanized, but let's tell you B, why do we actually get proper mechanisms for why we actually get accountability? We get accountability through schools. We get accountability through people actually seeing them in society. We get accountability through like weekly checks on the social workers. We get accountability because that was the realistic case scenario here. That was happening in the status quo. That was what was going to happen in the first place. Okay, now, visibility. Okay, now, how is accountability achieved? Sure, take your time.
If social workers went over every week to foster homes, wouldn't that same mechanism of accountability work better under our side where social workers work every single day?
No, it was never going to be the case because, okay, you have a social worker that goes to an institution, right? Okay, who are they going to hold accountable? It's one thing to say, oh, we're just going to hold the entire institution accountable. Sure, cool. Did Banksia Hill change just because you held the entire institution accountable? No, we didn't. What we actually got was in foster care, we knew who the people responsible were. We knew that the actual foster care parents were responsible for their foster kids. That was who we were holding accountable. You can say, oh, we got the media involved for Banksia Hillbrook, whatever it is, the prison, right, or the juvie. We knew, we can just say, okay, we hold that accountable in the media. What does that do? Absolutely jack all, right? So that was how we were going to get unique accountability measures on our side of the house. Okay. Now, onto the second part, how accountability is achieved. The opposition wanted to claim that facilities detect abuse. We tell you that this is not true. Why? No, thank you. We tell you that this is not true. Why? Because they had a unique incentive to keep things under the rug. When you had multiple levels of middle management, it was incredibly easy to keep things under the rug. Because who are you going to hold accountable? Who was responsible for keeping the kid malnourished? Absolutely nobody. Because if you went up with the top dog, they could just go, oh no, that was just someone lower down, and then fire someone random, like a lottery ticket, right? Or you would take out the top dog, which would create instability in and of itself, which was worse outcomes for the actual kids.
For information.
No, thank you. So we thought that was a unique harm on their side of the house. And it was untrue that facilities detect abuse. What we thought was better on our side of the house, and what I've been repeating throughout this entire speech now, what our team has been repeating throughout this entire case, is we actually got better accountability measures because of just how easy it is to then pinpoint who we are actually holding accountable. No, thank you. It's also not last chance. Okay. How do we get better care on our side of the house? Okay. The opposition wanted to argue that there was a capacity gap and there was instability and fragmented care. Look, that was just not true, because when you had a revolving door of expertise workers, as the opposition wanted to claim, or a revolving door of workers, we think that that was more unstable than having a set foster worker or a set social worker assigned to your case. We think that that was more stable on our side of the house, so we got better care in that kind of realm. Cool. The opposition also wanted to claim that we get a community of peers, which is then better on the institutional side. We tell you that it is not a better community than the community you're being put with is a very, very large group of people, often of which are coming from broken homes. Now the opposition wanted to go, oh no, that's awful, they're saying that all like vulnerable people are doing drugs and stuff. We tell you that, yeah, actually, the people who are in these orphanages, the people who are coming from these, people who are unable to have their parents look after them, we think that realistically, yes, they were coming from poor backgrounds and broken backgrounds. We think that realistically, yes, we actually do think the drug cycle and the violence cycle. Do you think that that was just a known fact, and we don't think that was unfair for us to say in this debate, and was a unique harm on their side of the house? So, because we got better care and because we got better accountability, we get so many more benefits as the opposition, and I'm so proud to negate.
Thank you very much for the third negative for that speech. The panel now retire, and whilst they're deliberating, I'd like to invite Luke, the chair of the board, to deliver their address.
Hey folks, sorry, I'll just make this quick so you folks can get on with discussing that today. But like all speakers before me, I'd like to congratulate everyone that's debated tonight. I think this highlights the quality of our competition and the skills in critical thinking and public speaking that our students develop. And I'd like to extend that congratulations to all participants in our SDC this year. I think that's it. Now, just for a number of thank yous. Firstly, just to all our families and our wider community for driving kids around and bringing them down to debates every fortnight. Thank you. Couldn't be done without your support. Likewise, our coordinators who work tirelessly and serve as the link between Wattle and our parents and students. Thank you. Yes, really appreciate all the time you spend working late to attend our debate evenings and tireless communication you conduct between us and you folks. To my fellow board members, thank you, Raylene, Renee, Suen, for all your support. I think, we're set to deliver our first strategic plan for Wattle, mapping out our next 3 years. So that's really exciting. And on that note, I would like to say we are currently looking for new board members. Terms go for 3 years. If this sounds interesting to you, and we're opening this to anyone or any members of our community, please reach out via our LinkedIn. Is probably the best way to go about that. But to deliver that, of course, we'd never be able to without the support of our volunteers. Firstly, adjudicators, and just as a side note, any Year 12s, please sign up. It's just a fantastic experience, and of course, our debates would never run without them. I remember when I was adjudicating, it was probably the highlight of my week. And look, it's just a fantastic way to make new mates as you move on from high school. Next, to our committee and executives, so Kelly, Riley, Hookham, Michelle, Redwin and Jamie, as well as our state team coaches, Ethan Stan. Thank you so much for all your hard work. As I said, adjudicating is fun, but being on our committee is hard work. And it really is impossible without a deep passion for debating. And keeping in mind, these are people that have volunteered with us usually for at least like 3 or 4 years, on top of their studies and other jobs as well. So a huge thank you to them. Again, would not be possible at all. They coordinate our volunteers, liaise with schools, and simply ensure that our competitions continue to run. So a massive thank you for them. And yeah, I think tonight is a celebration of our students as much as, no, other way around. But yeah, thanks to our community executives, they're great. Thank you. And all our adjudicators know this, but please apply for committee and exec as well. Those are open now. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
insightful. It looks like they went it was a really good